Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, it's been a week. For the last couple episodes, I've been alluding to some life-changing health stuff that's been going on. I got some answers on Thursday, and while it's not great, it is not the worst case, and we're hoping it's manageable. And I've been diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, or CLL. The oncologist considers me to be stage 0, with the possibility of going years before the condition progresses to the point of requiring treatment. And even if it does end up requiring treatment, it's manageable, or should be manageable. Anyway, I wrote extensively about all this in a special edition of the Virtual Memories email on Friday, and a lot of people wrote back. I've talked about it with a few people several times. I don't want to go into the whole shebang here. The basics are, I went to my doctor for a physical after skipping 2020 due to the pandemic. I'm 50. He wanted full blood work done, and my blood test came back a little hinky. I went for more blood work 2 weeks later to make sure it wasn't, well, with hopes that it was just an infection or something that was causing the hinkiness. It was not. And that led me to a hematologist appointment, which led to this diagnosis. CLL. It's a disease for which there is no direct cause beyond genetic mutation, no cure, but effective treatments, and nothing I can do to affect its progression beyond staying in shape in order to handle the side effects of those treatments whenever I reach the point that I need them. Anyway, I am in a decent mental state, especially after people started writing back on Friday and over the weekend when I sent that big email out. A ton of people had experiences with CLL and similar diseases, either directly or through their family and friends and coworkers. And their stories and experiences kind of helped me an awful lot, which I know is part of the whole nature of reaching out and having a community, which this show has brought me blessedly over the, almost 10 years I've been making it. In the uncertain period leading up to the initial diagnosis and then the, confirmation of that, I speculated on some worst case scenarios, and that got pretty dark, but it was also kind of comforting in terms of my stepping back and assessing my life and what I've done with it. And one of the takeaways was I looked at this show as my primary legacy in the world and felt pretty good about that whole idea. Anyway, if you want to hear more about this, hit me up and we can talk or correspond. I'm sure this is going to leak into conversations going forward, but I don't want to just make this about me, as it were. So the upshot is I've been diagnosed with CLL, may stay dormant for years. I plan to keep making this podcast every week, but I now have to append every statement I make with health permitting. Also, my one message to people, if you've been blowing off routine medical stuff like physicals, checkups, and all that, please don't. I hope this kicks you in the ass a little and gets you to the doctor's office just to make sure things are okay. I know it can be an inconvenience and an expense and everything else, but this is your health we're talking about. Now, on with the show. My guest this week is the artist and illustrator Anita Kunz, who has this wonderful new book out from Fantagraphics called Another History of Art. The book consists of Anita's renditions of classic paintings, but filtered through a couple of distinct lenses. Her luminous personal style, her pop culture sensibilities and what I guess as a guy I should just call the female gaze. She brings a different eye to paintings that we know as classics from a guy perspective for the most part. And the thing is, opposite each piece of art is a paragraph or two of biography about the original painter. But the another history part is that Anita feminizes every name and switches the gender pronouns from masculine to feminine throughout. And in concert with the gorgeous weirdness of the paintings themselves, it's a really interesting device to make us look at and reconsider the art and art history when you keep the facts the same, but swap the genders for everybody. I also laughed very hard when an art critic was named Roberta Hughes, just because I envision Robert Hughes in drag, and that's just funny in and of itself. But anyway, the paintings are fantastic, both in terms of technique and style. Anita infuses each with enough strangeness to make them her own while paying homage to the originals. Oh, also, when I mentioned her style and sensibilities, a lot of primates show up where the primates do not exist in the originals, like in Leona da Vinci's Woman with Monkeys and Henrietta Matisse's The Tamarind Dancers. Between that and appearances of Popeye and Olive Oyl and Nancy and Sluggo and some other cartoon figures in the roles of some of these, again, classic pieces of art, you will marvel and laugh on just about every page of this book. It's another history of art is a joy to look at and to read, and it may rejigger your brain a little. So I hope you'll pick it up from your favorite bookstore. Now, I should add that Anita's been a professional illustrator for 4 decades and has had an amazing career leading up to this point. So we get into a lot of history, which, I love when I get to sit down with somebody who's really experienced an awful lot of change over her career. And a few of her peers, whom I've recorded with over the years, like Joe Ciardello and John Cuneo and guys like that, have asked me occasionally, have you done a show with Anita yet? So I'm awfully glad we got the opportunity for this one, and I hope those guys dig it. Now, here's Anita's bio from Another History of Art. There's a more extensive one at her site, anitakunz.com. Anita Kunz is an acclaimed illustrator and painter whose work has graced the covers of The New Yorker, Time, Rolling Stone, the New York Times Magazine, and many other mass circulation periodicals. She was named one of the 50 most influential women in Canada by the National Post. She was the first woman and the first Canadian to have a solo show at the U.S. Library of Congress. She has been appointed Officer of the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian honor. She lives in Toronto. Her new book is Another History of Art. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Anita Kunz. What's the origin of Another History of Art? It seems as though it began as art that you were making before, kind of developing into the concept for the book. But why don't you tell us the origins of it and what the book is?
Well, the book, it's a satirical book, and it's meant to be a funny look at the history of art from the way that I've experienced it as an artist and when I was young as an art student. And there were certain things that I noticed as I was learning about art and making my own art, and that is that it's a very white male dominated industry. And to a certain extent, the art world is a meritocracy, but then there certainly are other factors at play. And, whether we talk about, women mostly being models or muses and not actually the artists themselves, or whether we talk about, ways in which women have been treated differently. So I've always sort of been aware of that. And I certainly have my own experiences over, 40 years as an illustrator. But I started wanting to stretch a little bit after having illustrated for other people for magazines and book, doing book jackets and stuff. I was always doing things, sort of solving other people's visual problems. And I wanted to sort of start doing my own, but I didn't know really where to start. And some of my illustration heroes like Sue Coe and Ralph Steadman, I mean, they really do their own work, and they really make work about what they believe in and what they, what they think of the world and their place in the world. And so, sort of inspired by people like that, I started wanting to just challenge myself. So I started making big paintings. And so this at the very beginning, this was never going to be a book. I mean, that was later. But I just wanted to make bigger paintings and challenge myself and try different materials. And whereas I was always making tiny watercolor pictures, I wanted to work bigger. So I started working 30 by 40 and even bigger. And, so the whole thing was an art project. I mean, I was using metallic paints and golds and silvers. And, so I started, that's what I started doing. And this was years ago. And I used the basis of what I knew from art history as source material.
I've got my Vasari over on the shelf right next to the monitor over here, as a matter of fact. But yeah. Yeah. What was that like doing the research, compressing it, and doing the gender reversals that it all entailed? Both of the what did you like? What went into that, and what did you kind of learn in the process of that compression?
Well, I mean, I suppose I've always looked at the world from my perspective, obviously. So that wasn't a huge stretch. And I really used a lot of the paintings that I already loved. I love this work. I love these extraordinary paintings that we learned about in art history. So it's not a matter of me, sort of making fun of the paintings. It was more about the authorship, and why were we looking at this from sort of a very Western male perspective when there are so many other art histories out there that are amazing and that should be explored.
At what point did it feel like a series? Not even, the book that it ultimately became, but when did you start to feel that, this is the way or what I want to explore? Was there X number of paintings before it became, let's make this the deep dive and continue in this vein?
I never saw it as a bigger project until later. I just, I was doing my illustration work, and then on the side, I was kind of experimenting with these paintings, and again, using different materials and not knowing what was going to happen. And I actually worked a little bit. I didn't work the same way as I work with my illustration work. Like, my illustration work is very thought out, and everything has to be sort of perfect, and I do multiple sketches, and the client needs to be happy, and all the stuff that you do as an illustrator. But here suddenly I was the one, it was up to me, and I didn't have to please anybody. And so I sort of had this freedom to experiment more. And that's what I started doing. And it wasn't until later that I saw sort of a series. And I think it became a series, first of all, just by virtue of the fact that the paintings were all the same size, and so they kind of looked like a series. But somewhere along the way, I mean, I've done a lot of personal work over the years, and I think a lot of people think it's really weird. And I have friends who just like that. They just shake their heads like, where is this stuff coming from? And then somebody told me, well, why don't you write along, like make it like help people understand this stuff. And I thought, I'm not a writer. I can't write. And then I sort of thought about it. And then later still, after I had a number of paintings, I thought, well, maybe I should sort of compile this and create sort of a more easily understood narrative. And And that's what happened. I mean, I did the whole thing was very, very, very backwards. I did it very backwards. And then after I had all the paintings, I thought, like after the paintings were done, I thought, oh, I guess I should write. But I mean, it was way later.
Trust me, one of last week's guests, a Singaporean cartoonist, as she was describing how she began making cartoons, I realized she literally backed into it. Like she reverse engineered what cartoons and comics were. She didn't think of that as her goal. She kept, I'm doing these paintings, but I feel there should be something that ties them together. And maybe if there were words, I'm like, you reverse engineered comics. She's like, yeah, that's what I realized after that, you kind of.
Isn't that funny? I mean, I totally get that.
Yeah, it's just nuts.
But the thing is, I didn't really write this book. I mean, this is based on historical text. All I did was change the pronoun. And I realized that by changing the pronouns, it added a sort of more of a layer to it. It sort of expanded on the idea even more. So I was happy about that, but that was kind of an accident too.
Yeah. Did you feel, I mean, again, I sort of asked what did you learn as opposed to, what was it like, I guess, just seeing every he turn into she and every king turn into a queen and the masters turn into mistresses, I know we all know how much that weight of white male, I don't want to say oppression, but just the dominance of that in art and literature and everything else.
I mean, I guess, I don't know. I guess it kind of helped make my point. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to spend my whole life, thinking, I just want to make pictures, frankly. Yeah. I don't want to be railing against things that I don't want to always be talking about.
Sure. And it's not a didactic book by any means.
I did not want it to be. No, I mean, that's why there's so much humor in it. I mean, I want people to get their own thing, their own experiences out of it. Absolutely. And that's I'm sorry. But I mean, I almost feel that that's the difference between illustration and fine art. I mean, illustration has to be very, it has to be a certain way, and it has to, it needs to follow certain parameters or be within certain parameters. But this is one of the first areas where I just did whatever I wanted to do. I mean, it was incredibly freeing, but it was a little scary too, because I've never worked this way, where I just thought, well, let's put a bunny head on something and see what happens,
Well, that's what I was going to ask. The pop culture and comics visual references that make it in. I mean, it reminded me in one respect of like Bob Sikoriak and the Masterpiece comics that he did, but this is a completely different direction and a different thing that you're achieving with it. Having olive oil and Popeye in and Nancy and Sluggo and the other scene.
Yeah. Well, I think, having, once you start doing a lot of, one certain type of work, it takes on a life of its own. And that's certainly what happened here. I mean, at the very beginning, I wanted the work to be just really beautiful and funny, yes, but I was more interested in making something that just looked really good and was beautiful and beautifully painted. And then as time went on, it took on a life of its own. And, just allowing myself to refer back to references of when I was young and stuff like that. It just, it ended up being really surprising. And now I really like doing it. I like, I like mixing and matching. Yeah. It's kind of hard for me to do illustration work that's very controlled now. It's like, but what if we do this? Anyway.
Yeah. Or putting monkeys and other primates in as you do. Yeah. In a number of the paintings too.
Yeah. So. Well, the thing is that, I mean, I'm always like, that makes absolute sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to everybody else, but to me, it's like perfectly normal. So I don't know what that says about me, but there you go.
Well, we'll talk about monkeys a little later on, because I know you've got they play a significant role in your life, which might sound a little foreboding to people who don't know your life. But I'm wondering though, when you talk about like illustration versus fine art, when you sort of see those diverge or saw those diverging over the course of your career and how you've managed to interweave them and what it's like making art that's specifically intended for print versus something that's going to be, on display in a gallery? Do you approach them with different tools? Are there different, modes that you think of besides the editorial involvement with illustration?
Well, the editorial field, I've been doing it so long. I know exactly, I know exactly what a client wants, and I know what is important and what's not important, and I try to be as professional as possible. I've been learning a little bit more about the gallery world, but I'm still completely baffled as to how it really works. I mean, I sense that if you're an illustrator, and this is what I've always told students, if you're an illustrator, what you need to be able to do is have a cohesive style. You need to be professional. You need to meet deadlines. Like you have to meet there's certain things that you have to do. In the gallery world, it's not always about that kind of stuff. I think a lot of it has to do sometimes with where you've studied. And I don't have any kind of a pedigree. Like I didn't go to Yale or something, so, and stuff that might be important in the gallery world, I don't have. And the other thing that I'm painfully aware of is that in the gallery world, if you've been an illustrator, it's difficult to take the leap.
Yeah. I could imagine there's the fence. No, you're commercial. You're on the other side. You're an illustrator. Yeah. And we saw the same thing with comics, or comics artists, as their work became more accepted or changed, how the art world changed its appreciation of that.
Right. Absolutely. I think, definitely on the West Coast is more accepting of, I guess, quote, illustration work or comics or graphic novel, as something serious rather than the East Coast. But yeah.
And when you talk about style and how you talk to students about developing that, where did your luminosity come from? And I mean that in terms of your paintings as opposed to you visually in person, because we haven't actually met yet, but that luminous quality to your work, when did you develop it? When did you realize this is, going to be a signature thing for me?
Again, I have to say by accident. I mean, I had to figure out a way to work that I could do quickly, that, it couldn't be too light, like it had to have some substance to it. Because if a painting had, if it was too light or if it, I don't know, it wouldn't print well. I mean, there were other considerations. So, I had to use colors that were more robust in case something printed light. So, I don't know, the luminosity. I don't know. I mean, I have stood in front of the Van Eyck altarpiece and for like an hour and wondered how something could be so exquisitely beautiful. I mean, I don't know how the old masters did it. I mean, I know it was oil paint and stuff like that, but I mean, I've always tried to make my paintings look like there's substance to them, and there's detail and there's effort, and I've always tried to do that. And having worked mainly in watercolor, I sort of just built on the watercolor. So I started using water-based materials, and then I started adding other things. So I started adding acrylic, maybe gold here and there. So I just built on what I already was doing as an illustrator.
And where did art begin for you?
Oh, well, when I was a kid, I had an uncle who lived on it. He was an illustrator, and his motto was art for education, and he produced all of these exquisitely illustrated books. He illustrated all the textbooks we had in high school, but he was also he painted landscapes, and he did stained glass windows and architectural friezes, and I mean, he was a consummate artist. And so that was, I wanted to be him. And plus his studio was on a lake, and he was an environmentalist, and so definitely that was that's what I wanted to do. So I had him as an example. So that was it. And I not the idea that he wanted to make art that had a purpose. Like his thing was art for education, but I became really enamored with the idea of making art that had some kind of a purpose that existed within some kind of a framework, like it was a cultural conversation, or it illuminated something, that had a social or political context or something like that. So I didn't go the educational route. I went the editorial route.
And your art history, I mean, you talk about compressing the things you learned and the other biographers of artists as the facing pages of another history of art, but in concert with going to art school, learning the history of it all, was that concurrent or something you kind of?
It's interesting. The art school I went to here in Toronto, at that time it was more of a trade school. It was not a degree granting school, and we didn't take art history at all. I mean, they really taught us how to be commercial artists, which was great because as far as technique went, I had a decent education, and I actually had teachers who would come up from New York and teach us, which was really cool. I had a teacher at OCAD called Doug Johnson. I don't know if you know that name.
It sounds like a character from Mad Men. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, well, he did a lot of Broadway posters. He did a lot of time covers, and he is from Toronto, and he would send his friends up to come and lecture. So we had great lecturers. We had all the great illustrators of the day come and lecture us. So that was really eye-opening. But as far as art history goes, that was my own initiative. That was traveling to Europe and doing my own research.
And do we call the paintings in this book homage, pastiche, tribute, or is there an undefinable Anita Kunzness to the paintings?
Well, I can't help it but make them look that way. But definitely homage. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it again, it's satire. Even in my illustration work, I use humor. I think sometimes, especially if you tackle difficult subject matter, if there's an element of humor, it kind of softens the blow sometimes. Mm-hmm. So it's something I've always done. So,
was there a particular artist in the book you felt most tentative about trying to tackle, or adapt into your style?
I'm trying to think. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I mean, you have to. I mean, I really
you incorporate them. They are all you paintings. They're not aping the actual style of a lot of them. So they do all have the you-ness to them. So I wonder
Well, I can't really to a certain extent I can't really help that. I mean that's just what happens.
That's what makes it great. That's why I love the book so much.
Oh, thank you. Well, but also especially at the beginning, this wasn't going to be, I didn't think of this as a book. So this wasn't, I wasn't thinking, I wonder what people are going to think about this. It really was, I really just did this for my own amusement, and then later it became something that I thought had a point to it.
Are there subjects or fields you most love making art from?
I don't know. I've always tried to make art that kind of talks about the way I feel about the world. So mm-hmm. even my illustration work, I've tried to do work that has a social and political context or my concerns about certain things. These days it's obviously what we're doing as a species to the planet. this kind of really interesting notion. I don't know, this idea that we're so brilliant, like we're incredible with technology and going to Mars now and all these incredible things, and yet we have this duality where we're also so cruel to other people. I mean, they're and we're kind of killing the planet. I mean, there's so many things that I sort of want to make pictures about. And of course, making pictures is my voice. I'm not a writer. I'm not a politician. I'm an artist, and so that's kind of where it comes out.
Yeah, I'll note that this is the weekend that the Gulf of Mexico burst into flames from an oil pipeline thing. So if somebody's listening to this, weeks later, yeah, that's part of the environmental context of what we're all dealing with.
I was always thinking in terms of politics and how different political systems, like what is the best political system, and what is the best way to evolve and to become a more compassionate species and all that stuff. I kept thinking of that politics, there's got to be a political system. But then I started thinking, being more interested in our basic nature, and why do we keep repeating these mistakes, and why are we still fighting every time? And we're on the brink of so many species becoming extinct, and I really don't understand it. And so, sort of leaving political solutions, I'm sort of, I don't know, I'm super interested in why we behave the way we do. I think a lot of it has to, we have to, this kind of maybe goes to the monkeys now, going back to how we are, still gray apes, and we have ancient biological impulses that we don't seem to be able to control. And
in my day job, I do political lobbying for a weird portion of the pharmaceutical industry, not the bad guys.
Okay.
Both with primarily the U.S., but I've also dealt with Health Canada and other North American regulatory and legislative bodies.
Right.
And yes, I think contrasting things with primates is not inaccurate. I think there are incentives set up to drive certain types of behavior, but I think the setting of those incentives reflect some of those impulses that you were talking about, and that need for power, tribalism, dominance, and things like that in the short term that don't make accommodations for what, long-term needs, and considerations really are.
Right.
Yeah. It's,
I mean, I'll give you an example. I have a dear friend in New York who's married to an anthropologist, and we had brunch in New York just the day that Trump, I think, got into office. And he was seated next to me. He's actually he's very important in primatology. And I said, I can't believe it. And he said, you can't. Why can't you believe that Trump got into office? And I said, well, because yada, 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 there's no compassion, all the things I'm concerned about. And he said, yeah, but look at him. He's orange. He's like an alpha orangutan. And, so I find that so interesting that he looks through, that's his lens. He looks through everything like that. And he's exactly what a lot of people are looking for, what they think leadership qualities are. Like, he beats his chest and he's orange.
Yeah.
So, and I thought, and I sort of, looking at it from that perspective, I thought, okay, but now what do we do?
Yeah, it's horrifying, but now we can explain it at least. Yeah. It's daunting. Because he's out of office, I can make the comment now. The one piece of legislation that I needed to get passed overwhelmingly in Congress, but it requires a president's signature. If he doesn't sign it within 2 weeks, then Congress can pass it. Basically, it's called a pocket veto, and they can overrule it because they have the sheer numbers of people voting for it. And he took 6 hours fewer than the full 2 weeks to sign the thing.
Yeah.
And I was just like, let it go.
Yeah.
Let it be a pocket veto. And that way I can at least feel like the one thing I worked on doesn't have your sigsignature on it.
Yeah.
that, it went through despite you. But unfortunately he did sign it at noon on Friday when we had till 6 o'clock for that deadline. I was like, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
We got it through. That's all that matters. But But I could see how, especially the longevity of your career and the sort of places that you've worked, the things you've chronicled, like seeing the New Yorker covers and the other things, and seeing how you work through the Clinton and Bush years and Obama into the most recent one, how you must, I would say, again, be a chronicle, I guess, of what those times were like and the ways that we were seeing them and the way you were able to reflect that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting looking back at my career of 40 years. I think I've painted every president since Carter. So yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting, but I mean, so many things have changed in all that time. I mean, magazines and newspapers were where we got our information. So there was it was much more serious. I mean, there was a gravity to depicting depicting politicians, because that was, you knew that you would have so many viewers. Now everybody looks at the internet and so you don't know where the bias is. I mean, at least when I worked for different magazines, I sort of understood if there was a bias, but not now. The news seems to come from everywhere, and you almost have to do all kinds of research before you even believe something.
Yeah. How has illustration changed in that respect over the course of your career as technology has developed, as, magazines and newspapers have shrunk, basically?
Yeah.
How has the field changed, and how have you adapted to that?
I mean, when I first started and I was working for clients that were not in Toronto, I mean, I had to, this was even before fax machines. I mean, I had to, it's great. Yeah. I can't believe I'm so old. So I would talk to the art directors on the phone, and they would tell me what the assignment was. And then I would think about it, and then I would call them back, and I would verbally describe what the image might be.
Trust me, I can make this, really. Yeah.
So it was really difficult, and half the time they sounded so dumb, these ideas. Okay, well, I'm doing a face, and the neck's going to be crooked, and the hand's going to be, like it sounds so dumb, but that's really how I started. And then I would, do the painting, and then I would either mail it. This was before FedEx. I mean, I would either mail the painting, or I would go to the airport and put it on a flight. I mean, I remember I did a portrait of Mike Tyson for Sports Illustrated, and they realized at the last minute, at the 11th hour, they realized that he had in the meantime he had grown a little goatee, yeah. And so they literally flew someone from New York to Toronto so that I could paint this goatee on him, and then they took it back, and then it went to the printer. I mean, when I think about that now, anyway, so that was at first, and then I spent like $2,500 and got a fax machine, and I started faxing sketches, and that was weird, and then I started using FedEx to ship things, but. Yeah. But there was always a little bit of nervousness, because whenever I shipped something via FedEx or just via Air Canada or American Airlines or whatever, you never knew if the work would get there. I mean, I had some pretty nasty scares, where they lost paintings and stuff like that, and the deadline had to be met, of course. So.
Yeah. I've recorded with people who've had long careers like that. And even a little bit younger syndicated cartoonist told me about having to drive from Philadelphia to New York first thing in the morning to get the strips to the syndicate in time, and how the FedEx window at Philly International Airport would close just as he was running towards them to get it there, and then it was, God damn it, back in the car, I got to go up there and get them the moment the place opens. And,
yeah, the good old days, right?
It's just bizarre, Instead, we can do this. But go on. Yeah.
No, so I mean, you asked what the changes are. I mean, the changes are enormous. I mean, everything is different. I mean, the second I would get a job, I'd hop on my bike and pedal up to the library and look for reference at the picture collection here in Toronto. But I mean, half the time I remember getting an assignment from Time to do a portrait of Bill Gates, and I went up there, and it was too early. They didn't have photographs of him already, so I had to really, it was really hard to. to do likenesses without proper reference. I had to sort of pull things together. I had a friend who worked at a newspaper. Sometimes I would FedEx things from the picture collection in New York overnight and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's things we try to explain to kids nowadays. I'm only 50, but it's still, I came of age before we had all of this. And it's just you don't get what that was like when you had to go to a library. There was no other source.
There was no other source, yeah.
There were no search terms. There were people in a card catalog.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, when I was doing the research, about you and going over your CV and things like that, you've had mid-career retrospectives and awards. Do you feel like seeing your work, collected and treated, in those terms gives you, I would say, perspective or, much in the way that when you were working on these paintings, they gradually accumulated into a theme. Did the mid-career thing tell you anything about where you were at that point or the artist you were going to become?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, at the one at the Society of Illustrators was, I don't know how many paintings I had, but that was, it's really interesting to see all of your work up on the wall and just it's a really interesting experience because usually I'm working on one thing at a time and I can't remember what I did last week. That's out of my head. I'm totally sort of obsessed with what I'm doing now. But I think it's really good. I think it's really good for any artist to sort of think about where they are and where they've come from. But you know what? I just to answer your previous question too, just about the longevity. I mean, if it weren't for amazing art directors I've worked for, I wouldn't have had the freedom to be able to do the work that I was allowed to do. And I think it's, as an illustrator, it's all about working relationships with art directors. And I'm so lucky that I got to work with some of the greats. And, some of the greats who, like Fred Woodward, for example, who just, he just respected illustrators and photographers so much that he just gave us all this freedom. And, with that freedom came responsibility, though, too. I mean, the last thing you ever wanted to do was disappoint him. So, I worked really, really, really hard. So yeah, I mean, it's art directors are the ones that really allow illustrators to flourish or die on the vine, basically.
Did you ever work with George Lois?
I did not work with George Lois. No.
Okay. We recorded once, and he had a lot of stories.
I'll bet he does. Well, I mean, he was doing such groundbreaking work too. I mean, it's amazing. Half the time, like those Esquire covers. I mean, how did he get away with that stuff? You wonder who let him do this. I mean, it's brilliant, but.
It's incredible, right? When you look at things and think, wow, how did they actually run this on the cover?
I know.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I know.
But, different world. So,
yeah.
I do think, by the way, despite his renown, you are the first guest I have ever had who has had her work honored on a postage stamp.
Well, I mean, I was one of 6, I think, that they, in Canada, that they did a series of illustrators and, and I was one of them, and I know I got my own stamp, and that was really cool. It was kind of difficult to figure out which image which image that they wanted to print, but that was a big honor.
Yeah, I did look to make sure, like Jules Pfeiffer or someone else I've recorded with hasn't had that honor. And when I went through the likely prospects, I thought, no, okay, Anita's number one. You are the first stamp honored person I've ever got the honor to talk to. So
there must be.
I kept thinking that. I'm like, well, obviously they must have done Pfeiffer by now, or this one or that one. Then I realized nobody's making a Harold Bloom postcard or a postage stamp. So yeah, I do have weird tastes and. No Raj Chast stamp yet.
I'm really surprised.
Yeah.
I'm actually really surprised. Okay.
Yeah. But let me ask though, when you mention people like Sue Coe and Ralph Steadman, was there a point in your career when you felt you're a peer to your heroes, or to the people who were influences to you? When did you feel that you were, part of this, true cohort of illustrators? Did you ever feel like you were faking it, I guess, until a certain point? Not to say I'm as great as this person or that person, but just that you could hang with, yeah. Sorry.
Well, I have to admit, I'm still intimidated by both of them. I mean, Suko has been,
God, yeah.
right from the very beginning. I mean, I don't know, she's as authentic as it comes. And the same with Ralph Steadman. I mean, the interesting thing about Ralph Steadman is I've gotten to know him pretty well. And his big hero is Picasso. And he loves just the way, the audacity of what Picasso was doing at the time. And I thought that's so interesting. I would have thought it would have been someone else. But anyway, so he's amazed at that Picasso just shuts off, or he just shut off his inner voice, and he just made these paintings, and completely, half the work was distorted, and it was completely different than what had gone previously. But that's the way I look at Ralph's work.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, he just does this stuff, and he just goes with it, and he has decades of experience that he draws upon, and he still really does incredibly playful work. It's always serious subject matter, but it's incredibly, playful and wonderful. And I think as a writer, he's an incredible writer.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm still completely blown away by both of them.
Mm-hmm. I guess maybe that moment of they respect you. Have you had that sort of, they welcome you into the I don't want to say the pantheon because that implies a certain, high Greek ideal, but I have to say I pitched Ralph and his publicist turned me down. But when I was recording with Dave McKean, the artist and illustrator and musician and everything else, a few years later, he was like, we met in London, but he said, next time you're here, come out to where I live. We'll ambush Ralph and you can record him because apparently they live close by. So
they're both in Maidstone. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that ever happens, you'll know that I basically just muscled my way into Ralph's house and forced him to sit down and have a conversation. But
yeah. Well, he's another great artist for sure. I'm surprised they don't hang out, but there you go.
Yeah, they might, but they probably wouldn't if McKean introduced us. But either way, we'll see where all that goes. But one thing, when you mentioned Ralph's ability to draw on decades and decades of experience, for you, what's easier and what's tougher? What have you learned over the years that I don't want to say are tricks, but are things that you've picked up that you wish you had known when you were younger as an artist? And conversely, what becomes more of a challenge nowadays?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess as far as technique goes, as far as the actual making of the images, I mean, it just builds on itself, and it builds on itself by making many, many mistakes. I mean, I blew so many pictures, and I think, and that's how you sort of come upon what is called style. But as far as, I mean, I'm on a trajectory that I never thought I would be on. I mean, I would say to any young artist, just keep going and don't think too far into the future, because you don't know what's going to happen. Anything could happen. First of all, I never thought that I would sort of do things that were so sort of gallery oriented. I never, I always thought that illustration was a legitimate and amazing field on its own. So I never really thought that would happen. And then I never really considered doing a book, and now I've actually done 5. I mean, I've done one, I've got another one coming out in November, and I've got sort of 3 more that are ready to go, so I'm sort of feeling a sense of urgency that I want to get a lot of this stuff out before I get too much older.
You tell me about the one this fall. I think it's Original Sisters. Is that the title?
That was, so when when I knew there was going to be a lot, I had this idea in the back of my head for a long time, but I never really had time to do, to do it.
Yeah.
So I always thought that, there's so many, I was starting to read about these incredible women that I'd never heard of. And, I've lived a long time and why don't I know about this stuff? So I started compiling them. I started, saving pictures, and I thought, I'm gonna do their portraits. And, because I knew lockdown was coming, I knew I would have to do paintings just for my sanity. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do one a day. And so I just started, and I just started painting one a day. And, in that project, I started using, again, different materials. I started using soft body acrylics that I could use quickly. Again, the material wasn't fighting me all the time. Mm-hmm. So I started doing one a day. I'm up to 256 now. I've done 256, and I'm not anywhere near finishing. So the book was picked up by the wonderful Chip Kid, who I adore.
Yeah.
And
he and I tend to be the two best dressed people at like comics related events. Stephen Garnaccia is the third one, but it's really me and Chip are the guys who kind of stand out, even though I'm just some hanger on, but well dressed hanger on.
Seth is up there too.
Yes. I will send you a picture I took of Seth and me at an event. But yeah, Seth he's in his own style though. That what you're going to see when Seth is going to be there. So
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I just kind of on a whim, I sent it to Chip. Like I'd spoken with him at a conference before, and I saw him at the give his amazing TED Talk. So yeah, I sent it to him, and I didn't expect anything. And then a couple of days later, it was, "We love it. Let's talk." And I was just completely floored. And it was Dan Frank, the beloved editor, who recently passed. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm endlessly grateful. I mean, I have to, again, thanking the great art directors from the past that I had the privilege of working with. I mean, I'm so grateful to Pantheon for the book in the fall, and also to Fantagraphics, who gave me my first book. I mean, I didn't know anything about producing a book, so I was, I'm just really grateful to them.
I'm so glad that you've got another form to work in after, again, we've talked about, how long your career has gone and the ways it's evolved. To find another, avenue like this must be fantastic.
I'm really happy. Like I'm almost kind of obsessed with it. I have other ideas, but I don't know, we'll see how these two books go.
Sure. Now you mentioned COVID era productivity. Years and years ago, when I interviewed Matt Worker, the political cartoonist at the Washington, at the time at the Washington Post, he asked me, because I was going to talk to Drew Friedman around that time. He said, "Find out how the hell he produces so much art. I don't understand. Every week there's another book of 40 portraits and all this." And Drew explained to me that he was doing everything on like 5 by 5 inch pieces. So is part of the artwork a day keeping things relatively small?
It is. I mean, I'm still thinking about Drew Friedman because there's all that detail and all the stippling. I mean, he
got away from the stippling somewhat with washes and watercolors and such, but still.
Yeah, the detail.
You look at his work and there's so much in it. And Matt was dying. He's like, "I don't understand. How does he keep making so much great art?" So.
Yeah, so that makes sense that they're tiny. I mean, there is something to be said for working small, for sure. I'm trying to think the one, I think they're like 13, 14 inches high, but I've really simplified the portraits. Like the backgrounds are very simple, and what I wanted to do, it's really less about each particular painting. It's more about the collection. It's more about, I deliberately made them very colorful. Like I've used colors, like almost sometimes neon colors, because I wanted it to appeal to everybody. Like I want kids to like it. They're bright colors. They're happy portraits. And there are these like amazing stories of these incredible women who just, they're great stories. They're great little stories. So so I wanted them to be accessible. So I was very mindful of that. So yeah. So and I have right now a lineup of 50. So I'm going to hit 300 before too long.
Jeez.
So, but it's good. It's good. It's keeping me busy. It's keeping me not brood about things. I mean, the whole COVID experience has been incredibly frightening.
Oh, yeah.
You
And
know,
for everything I thought we were having a tough time with in the US, once we once we got around the corner in terms of vaccine production,
right?
all my friends, I've got a lot of business and other friends up in Mississauga and Toronto. I didn't realize how bad it still was as of last spring. I'm like, oh, I kind of thought you guys were getting the vaccines too. Guess it's
Yeah,
just us south of the border. And, now things again seem to be better or, have gotten better, but the disparities. Oh, I realized like things were starting to open up here in northern New Jersey, and we've been really cautious. We were the number one state for deaths per capita from COVID. So we're traumatized, but things are
yeah.
starting to open up. And then my Mississauga and Toronto pals are like, oh yeah, no, we're still in 80 years old plus range for vaccination.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
problem was that we don't like we outsourced the vaccine production years
Yeah.
ago. So we had to sort of wait on the kindness of our neighbors.
Yes. That is actually the field that I represent, the contract manufacturers of drugs and
Wow.
vaccines. So
Yeah, yeah,
I know what the setup is like. I knew there weren't any production facilities in Canada
yeah,
itself. And
yeah,
that's we're seeing investment now. One of my pals is involved in trying to jumpstart that.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
it's when you see the time delay for other places, like a friend of mine in Montreal just got her second dose today and said she was
yeah,
just in tears in the
yeah.
waiting room because this is, the next step, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I got my second one about 3 weeks ago. So,
Okay.
I mean, I think everybody in the U.S. or everybody I
Everybody
know
who wants one
anyway.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's been months for you. But I mean, of course, the problem is that now because it's taken us so long, now the Delta variant is
Yeah.
circulating.
That's
So it's
what we're all dealing with. But I guess the question is, did your work habits and routines change in the past year and a half in a way that, is still compatible with re-entering like day-to-day life? Yeah, you get what I'm asking.
yeah,
Has your work
yeah.
changed in a way that you can sustain now that we're starting to move past things?
You know, I, I spend so much time in my studio anyway, alone.
Yeah.
So for
This is the
me, it
ongoing joke,
was
by the way. Artists, cartoonists, and illustrators have been
yeah.
telling me it hasn't really been that much of a change
No,
for me.
no, I really. I mean, I hate to say it,
Yeah.
because I know it's been such a profound change for some of the healthcare workers and these extraordinary people that have been keeping us afloat. I mean, but no, I think for most creators, like artists and writers and whoever, the only thing, no, so the work is the same pretty much. It's just the travel. I do a lot of lecturing and I teach workshops, and so it's the traveling that's I mean, I used to go everywhere. I used to go someplace at least once a month, at least to a
Yeah.
school or to something. Um, so that's I mean I've been here for 14 months now, so that's the thing that's getting me down because I really love travel. I really
Yeah.
love going to other places. I love teaching. I love meeting other students and going to schools and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that
My sector is a lot of trade shows and exhibitions and networking events like that. And even my pals are like, I know we all complained about the airports and the hotels and everything,
yeah,
but oh my God, it would just be so great to go somewhere
I
just for
know.
a day conference and come back and complain about the flight and everything else.
I
Just,
know, I know,
yeah.
but also things like, I mean, I go to TCAF,
Yeah.
the Toronto Comic Arts Festival every year, and just it's sad that stuff like that some of the younger artists in particular,
Sure.
that's where they get their work out and everything. It's really sad that was.
Oh, it's our favorite festival. It's the only one my
I
wife
love
will
it.
accompany me to because she
Oh, really?
loves Toronto. We've been keeping an eye on our favorite restaurant up there, making sure they're still in business so that someday we will get to go back.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that event in particular, it just kills me not being able to go to the reference library and see, the whole flux of people and meet new artists. And
Yeah, yeah. There's this, I don't know what I can't remember the name of it, but there's this condition when you go to a place like the Louvre where you become overwhelmed. There's actually a real thing that if you spend too much, there's a name for it. I can't remember. I feel like that at TCAF. I mean, there's so much. I mean, everybody's so different. All these young, talented. I can't spend too much time there because my mind gets blown.
Oh yeah, it can be overwhelming, especially just I don't want to say the heat, but the sheer presence of so many people, and then all the art and everything else. I had a friend of mine who was based in San Diego. He was in the Navy, and about 15 years ago, I went to the San Diego Comic-Con. And I brought him in one day, and this guy was in charge of like the Aegis weapons system in a carrier group in the Gulf War. He was, tracking 10 million different targets and figuring out what to fire on and what's a friend. Yikes. He was overwhelmed walking around the Comic-Con. He was just like looking around like, I can't process all this. I'm like, Ian, you handled a carrier group's defense system. He's like, yeah, this is too much. I'm like, good to know. Okay.
I've never been to Comic-Con, but I'm forewarned. So yeah.
Yeah, that was the last one for me. I only went twice, and I think 2003 and 2005. Yeah. And I thought that's enough. I'm not the superhero side of the world. I'm more the art, the Fantagraphic side of things.
Right,
so,
right.
It's nicer to go to TCAF and SPX and smaller events. But one question I am sort of dying to ask: favorite person to draw, musician, politician, whatever? Was there somebody over the years that you just loved that you got to paint this person again and again?
Well, you stumped me.
Oh, geez, really? Because I just figured there would be either of someone who is super easy, because everybody hates Trump. Even Blitt, who got all of those New Yorker covers, is like, I'd rather not be drawing Trump every week.
Yeah. So, I only did a couple. Yeah. Trumps. I didn't pitch anything to the New Yorker. I didn't want him in my head. I didn't.
Yeah, that was Barry's thing too. He's like, I'd really prefer not to know how to do this and have a reason to. But,
boy, you're stumping me. I really can't think.
Well, we'll flip that to portrait subjects. Whoever reached out to buy your paintings of them.
Well, I used to teach at a workshop, and all my colleagues always had all these famous people buying their work. I was the only one where people never bought anything or they returned the work.
Oh my God.
I know. I had two instances. So I did a portrait of Elton John, and Gianni Versace wanted to buy it. And I was so happy. And I literally framed it in gold, and I did a gold net. I was for Versace, yeah. And I sent it over and to Milan, and and I don't even remember what I charged. I didn't even charge that much. I mean,
it's just the honor, yeah.
Oh yeah, and it was an Elton John that I had done for the New Yorker, and I sent it over. And I waited and waited and waited for my money, and then I don't know if I emailed them or called them. And the painting was back in between my doors the very next day, and I'll never understand why they returned it. And then there was another one. I did, and it was for Fred Woodward. It was for Rolling Stone. It was the Spice Girls versus Metallica, and it was like who sold the most records. And I made them like dragons, and they're fighting each other. And Lars from Metallica really wanted to buy it, and but in that scenario, I think he wanted to know how big it was. And of course it was like 12 inches by 8 inches. It was tiny. Yeah. And then he didn't want it. He didn't want it anymore. Like he didn't care. I think he wanted this gigantic painting
huge canvas.
Them slaying the Spice Girls or something. But that was, anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah,
that's very, very few.
That's weird. I feel bad asking the question now. I feel,
Oh, that's okay. I'm over it.
I was at Mark Ulrichson's place recording with him when Spike Lee's office called about, not about a picture of Spike, but a sports and Martin Luther King related New Yorker cover that they were buying. And a year or two later, I saw Spike Lee on the train down to Washington, and that was my in. I pitched him. He didn't say yes, but I had I record with Mark Ulrichsen, the guy who did that New Yorker cover that you bought. And I figured, that's an angle besides talking about the Knicks.
Yeah.
Those are the only areas we had. But yeah, it didn't get me close enough to getting a podcast out of him. So
this field, it's really interesting. I mean, I think people think that it's a lot more sort of glamorous than it is, and that we hang out with movie stars, and we're, and that these people sit for portraits, and it's like, no, I've got like 5 hours to do this, and I'm rushing, and I'm, and I'm completely stressed out, and my adrenaline's going crazy. There's no glamour to it. It's work.
Yeah.
So,
but it turns into art. So that's you're doing more than a lot of us do when it comes to making things that you're actually happy with over the course of your life. But tell me about the monkeys, and tell me about Pockets Warhol, who I heard about.
Yeah. Well, I volunteered with them for 5 years. I haven't really been back in a while, but yeah, it's the only primate sanctuary in Canada, and there are a lot of monkeys that are used in research, and as pets. People somehow think monkeys make good pets, but they don't, and so they always end up either euthanized or in sanctuary. So there are about 25 monkeys there, and it's all privately funded. There's no government support at all. So let's see. The sanctuary has adopted 3 of the first monkeys allowed to retire from lab research, and so there are a lot of monkeys who have incredibly sad stories, of abuse and stuff like that. But they're living there, and they're allowed to be monkeys. And I was just really taken by their mission statement, and so I volunteered there. I had I had a show. I asked a lot of illustrators to donate work, and a lot of people did. And so we had a great show and opening, and all the money went toward care and feeding of the monkeys. But it's just Pockets Warhol is one of the things about the monkeys is keeping them so that they're not bored, because they're smart. Pockets Warhol likes to paint, so that's what his enrichment is. It's called enrichment. So yeah, he loves painting, and he's got his own Facebook feed, Instagram feed, and it's very sweet. It's very sweet to actually watch how he paints, and just see how kind of Zen-like he is about it. And he makes these abstract paintings, and it's very Zen-like. He just paints and paints and paints, and then when it's done, he jumps away. So it's pretty cool.
I do have to ask the question that I've lately taken to asking artists, which only comes up because I finally started drawing and then doing watercolors over the past couple of months. When you mention that Zen thing, do you experience that at any point in the act of making art? Do you find yourself not losing yourself, but filtering everything else out?
That's the state that you aspire to be in, but it's something that's quite elusive. So, for the most part, I'm just trying not to make a disaster. Yeah. For the most part, I'm trying to fix it so it doesn't look bad. I'm working on it. Sometimes by the end of the day, I just think, that's it. I have to stop. This is, I need to throw this in the garbage. And then the next day it doesn't quite look as bad, and then I continue the process of trying to. It's interesting, but definitely the Zen state is that's the holy grail. That's where you want to be.
Yeah, gotcha. Because it's something I noticed drawing from life. I draw trees usually out in the yard, and since the leaves have come in and weather and everything else, I've taken to watercolors of existing photos. But when I was drawing from life, I just had that moment of, I'm conscious of what I'm doing, but I'm not thinking about my lobbying work and this FDA negotiation or this other stuff that's going on. I'm just trying to figure out how to draw this tree. And as I started talking to real artists like you guys, I realized, that's why you ended up making your life around this, because you were able to achieve that sort of focus and do this stuff at a relatively early age.
Yeah, no, it's true. I don't. I mean, I call it, I mean, there is a kind of an obsession that there is something that you aspire to, for sure. There is a state that you want to be in that I don't find in any other activity, like cooking or like
Yeah.
anything else. Like maybe some people do, in other, in other areas, but but I don't. And I think a lot of other artists don't, but
And
yeah.
I'm glad you've got this. And I'm glad you got both the art and I don't want to say the social cause behind it, because like we said, your work isn't pedantic, but I think, like you were saying, it has a purpose. You built a career that isn't one that's, chintzy, compromisey, celebrity portraits or something. Yeah, everything you've done seems to have a sense of that meaning, whether it's, again, the cultural, the political, et cetera. So,
Well, thank you. I mean, I always, like I said, going right back to the beginning, I always felt that art had a bigger purpose in life, or had a bigger purpose. I have a talk that I give to students about how art can have power
mhm.
in culture, just to remind us that it's not just a decoration. Like it can have real power and real meaning in our culture.
I appreciate the work you've done and looking forward to the next couple of books too. So, Anita, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much. This has actually been great. This went really quickly.
People usually tell me I forgot we were talking into even when we do it in person and there are two microphones in front of us. I forgot we were doing an interview. I'm like, yeah, the microphones are usually the clue, but whatever.
No, absolutely. Because I always get nervous about these things because, I do all this stuff and then I sort of feel as though I have to talk about it and defend it. And but it's good. Yeah. Anyway.
Thanks
So
again. You're
many
wonderful.
thanks. Thank you so much.
And that was Anita Kunz. Her new book is Another History of Art from Fantagraphics. And this November, she'll also have Original Sisters, Portraits of Tenacity and Courage, published by Pantheon with a foreword by Roxane Gay. You can check out Anita's work and speaking engagements and videos and other stuff a couple of different ways. Her main site is anitakunz.com, which is ANITAKUNZ.com. She's also got AnitaKunzArt.com, which is focused on her portfolio and has a link to a store for her work. She's on Instagram as Anita Kunz, all one word, and Facebook at Anita Kunz Art. And I'll have links to all of this stuff in the show notes for this episode. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you haven't been checking out Anita's work, because it's so beautiful and there's so much she's done over the decades. So I hope you go check it out. You can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it, whether that's by, whatever your social media of choice is, or email if you're an old person like me. You can also support the show by reaching out and telling me what you like and don't like about it, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie or TV show or book or comic or piece of music you think I should turn listeners onto. You can do that by email, or you can go even more old school, send me a postcard or a letter. You can also leave a message on my Google Voice number, which allows messages up to 3 minutes long. I do not answer. The number doesn't forward to my phone, so you don't have to worry about me picking up. But if you want to leave a message, it is 973-869-9659. And if you've got money or resources to spare, then don't give it to me. I'm doing fine even with this crazy health stuff. My job treats me okay. I've got health coverage. We'll see how that all works out in America. But I'm not asking for money. What I am asking is that you help other people. Go through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, whatever the crowdfunding source is. And there'll be people there you can help, whether that's with health bills, financing an artistic project, whatever it is. Also, if you're less comfortable with individuals who want to help out institutions, you could look to your local food bank, the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds. There are lots of different nonprofits and charities that are trying to work to build a better world. So I hope you'll help those. Last thing, still have some copies left of the first issue of my very first zine, Haiku for Business Travelers. It's got my writing, poetry, photography, podcast excerpts. I think that's everything that's in it. 32 pages. It's pretty neat. It's free. So if you want one, just drop me a line or fill out the form at haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and hit me up that way. You can kick in a few bucks for postage and production if you want, but honestly, it's already paid for. It's out there in the world. I just like sharing my art, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.